Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a field forward podcast. I hope you all had a wonderful Memorial Day holiday weekend. I know I'm a little tired because of moving. I was moving all weekend long. It was pretty busy for me. Hope it was good for you as well. I'm David Geiger, your host. I've been on Iowa TV and radio here for the last decade, and I am excited to start up this podcast, Farm Here Daily. Today on the program, we're going to dive into the weeds of a bill that has a massive impact on low-carbon ethanol production in Iowa. It's waiting to be signed or vetoed by the governor, and Monte with the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association has a lot to say about it, to say the least. So please be sure to like and follow the podcast, as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, making sure folks in Iowa are informed about what is affecting our farmers. And joining us on Farm Here Daily, we have Monte Shaw, the Executive Director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, again on Farm Here Daily. Monte, always good to talk to you. Wish it was in a little bit better circumstances, because right now there is a bill that is not jiving well with the folks with the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association and corn growers, etc. There's plenty of folks who are dealing with this bill right now. Can you tell me a little bit about HF 639?
Yeah, so despite all the rhetoric about the Constitution and property rights and eminent domain, House File 639 is a much more wide-ranging bill that affects lots of different things outside of carbon capture and sequestration, but doesn't actually directly, do anything about eminent domain, property rights, or carbon capture and sequestration. It tries to kind of what I view as a little bit of I don't want to say dishonest, but I mean, kind of a backhanded or backdoor way of trying to make CCS projects non-viable. But it's like, if that's what you want to do, just try to pass that bill, right? So unfortunately, this bill has a number of provisions. A couple of them are kind of rifle shots to the head of CCS projects, carbon capture and sequestration. And then a couple would have huge, widespread negative consequences throughout Iowa's entire economy and are not anywhere near limited to just CCS. So we think this bill should be vetoed for a number of different reasons. We're asking Governor Reynolds to veto it and asking people to call in and write in and text in and tweet in or whatever it is people do and ask her to veto it, because this bill has so many kind of wackadoodle provisions that even if you didn't like the CCS projects, let's just say for a second, I think they're important to Iowa's future and Ag's future, but let's say you just don't, you hate them, whatever, you want them dead. Well, even if you felt that way, if you took the time to read this bill and understand the widespread negative consequences, you'd still want the bill vetoed.
Okay, so here's kind of, maybe my question might be a little edgy, but here's my question, because we know that there have been oppositions to things like oil pipelines from Canada down through the U.S. and its eminent domain issues, but those managed to get through in certain states. Is this bill, would it stop something that would be akin to that, where there's an oil manufacturer going through the state, or is this basically only applicable to carbon capture projects?
And that's kind of one of the weird dichotomies of all of this is, all along, most of the bills that they were pushing and most of the rhetoric was focused exclusively on carbon capture. And I kind of teased them at the time. I said, well, wait, if this is really about constitutional private property rights, then why would you put these limitations only on carbon capture pipelines? Why wouldn't they apply to everything, right? I mean, if we're literally talking about a constitutional right and a policy, or a principle, if you will, not a preference. But it turns out that despite all their rhetoric about principles, it was really just about their preferences. And then lo and behold, the bill that they sneak out at the end of the session is one that has much wider consequences than that. So it's funny to me. There's so many dichotomies here. So like when the last oil pipeline that came through Iowa, the Dakota Access Pipeline, there was a little bit of opposition from a couple landowners and couple of groups, but nothing major. I mean, it was in the news a little bit. I remember reading about it at the time, but no major multi-year effort to do anything. And so, I guess, maybe no one had read the Constitution or cared about property rights back then. And then when we try to do a carbon capture pipeline, all hell breaks loose. And so, I've always found that odd. But to your question, There are two provisions in the bill. One that I call the lawsuit bonanza or death by lawsuit that would allow basically anyone, almost anywhere to intervene in the process and slow the process down, which costs money and makes these things harder to permit. But also, once you're an intervener, you have the right to sue. So almost anybody could sue at almost any stage of this. And it really, people look at this and saying this would add years to the process and millions of dollars to any project trying to move forward that any small group of people decided to oppose it had means. The second thing is they put in some really weird insurance requirements. Now, I got really upset the other day because one newspaper, we held a press conference about this, and one newspaper said we were objecting to enhanced insurance requirements. No, there are very robust insurance requirements in any Iowa Utilities Commission permit. Okay, what we were saying is they actually have a provision in there that you have to insure against intentional acts of sabotage.
Right. So that would be somebody who went out and vandalized or damaged it because they didn't like it.
Yeah, or the company could do it. So that would be like trying to get think about this if you own a home. It'd be like trying to get an insurance policy that would pay you to rebuild your home if you burned it down. You can't buy that. That's not how insurance works. That provision does not exist in any insurance policy in the world. That provision, that requirement does not exist in any other permit or any other thing, building, pipeline, you name it, anywhere in the world, because you can't buy insurance to do that. That's like the antithesis of how insurance would work. So that provision would apply to any permit coming before the Iowa Utilities Commission. So I would think that if you were trying to, let's say, go into southeast Iowa where we have a shortage of natural gas, and you're like, hey, I'm going to bring some natural gas in here and help with economic development, you're going to have to get through the lawsuit bonanza, and you're going to have to try to find insurance that doesn't exist. I think that's going to be very problematic. The same is true if we're trying to bring a liquid fertilizer line in somewhere, or anything else, propane, diesel fuel, you name it. So if this bill is signed by the governor, it is just an economic fact that the cost of energy and therefore the cost of doing business in the state of Iowa will go up. The only question is how much. And so,
okay, sorry, I just wanted to interject there on that specific thing. Would that then apply to current pipelines or current lines of energy, or would those be grandfathered?
So the IUC process is over. The insurance requirements are already in those permits, but permits, and it actually is another provision, one of the bad provisions in this bill. But currently, you get a permit in Iowa for 25 years, up to 25 years, but you can renew it. My understanding is that when you renew, you're getting a new permit, so that these things would kick in. So whenever those current things come into play, they'd have to comply with these new requirements if this bill is signed into law. That alone is, again, you could hate carbon capture and sequestration, but say that insurance provision is just dumber than a box of rocks and will destroy economic development in Iowa. And maybe we don't actually want the governor to sign that.
So you talked about earlier how there was some opposition to pipeline projects, etc. What do you think has changed to make it so there is as much support now versus things? Do you think it's purely just the dislike of carbon capture projects? If so, why do you think it's that way?
I don't know what brought everybody out. I mean, I think it was one of those things where it became kind of a self-feeding fire. I mean, so you have the Sierra Club. They're on record. I'm paraphrasing here, but they oppose this because they don't want ethanol to be low carbon, because then it would be more attractive and it would delay the transition to electric vehicles. So their opposition to this is very straight. Give them credit. It's straightforward. They don't like modern agriculture. They view ethanol as a market that perpetuates modern agriculture, and they want to destroy both. So at least I understand why they oppose it. I mean, it's kind of silly if you actually care about removing carbon from the atmosphere, which they claim to, then I would think capturing carbon that's already there and putting it back underground would actually be a good thing. But what you learn about a lot of these environmental groups, not all, I want to be clear, but a lot of them is, they have their preferences too and what they want. It's all about clicks and fundraising and memberships and stuff like that. So they're out there doing their thing, but then you have a group on the right that viewed this as, maybe part of the Biden New Green Deal or whatever. And they're really uninformed because actually these projects all started when President Trump was in his first term, and he signed into law the Trump tax cuts that included a major enhancement of the 45Q tax credit for carbon capture and sequestration. That's when all these projects got going. Now,
Yeah.
President Biden also did some policy that made it even more attractive, right? But they all started under President Trump. And recently, he has tweeted, in trying to get some pro-pipeline legislation through Congress, he's tweeted about how his support for pipelines and that legislation. And in fact, on Earth Day, the President Trump put out a statement about Earth Day, and he said that by supporting cutting edge technologies like carbon capture and storage, and then he mentioned some other things, the Trump administration is ensuring America leads in both energy production and environmental innovation. So President Trump has been very clear that CCS projects are a key part of his American energy dominance program. And so some of the people who claim to be supporting the president are actually undermining his energy agenda here. So just a lot of weird stuff going on, but at the end of the day, I have to read the bill. I have to think through how it will impact our industry, the renewable fuels industry, and how it will impact the state. And, this would be very problematic. And it's like, hey, if you want to ban CCS projects, then why don't you have the guts to put up a bill that bans CCS projects? Not one that, we're going to, change some definitions here that make it very hard, or add some, limit your permit to only 25 years without a renewal. So that, that'd be like saying, hey, you can build a house here, but in 25 years, you have to walk away. You can't live in it. You can't use it. You can't rent it. You can't sell it. You just have to let it stand there and rot and eventually fall in on itself. That's just dumb.
It's kind of just a complicated process to mess up carbon capture in Iowa specifically, because we don't really have very many places to compete with other states like North Dakota or Illinois, where they have the capabilities to sequester their carbon.
The lack of knowledge of the bill has been pretty. I'm not going to say the name, but there was a state representative who contacted a staff member of an affiliate, well, not affiliated, but an organization that also supports CCS projects like the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association does. And they're like, why are you putting out this misinformation about, there being this 25-year limit on these pipelines? That's not true. Why would you say that? And they're like, dude, you voted for this bill. Read the bottom of page 6. It's there. It's in black and white. So we've had other people say, look, I don't want these big pipelines. I just want to sequester here in Iowa, as you just mentioned. I said, well, look, let's just say that magically the Geological Society survey finds a couple places in Iowa where we can sequester. We don't know of any now. There is one test bore going on. Maybe it'll find something, maybe it won't. But let's just say we do. Well, it's not going to be right under all 42 Iowa ethanol plants.
Yep.
You're going to still need a pipeline, even if
it's just here.
Even if it's to go 10 miles down the road to an Iowa sequestration site, you're going to need a pipeline to get there. And this bill limits that to a 25-year permit, puts on crazy insurance requirements, would make it go through the gauntlet of the lawsuit bonanza. And, by the way, they changed the decades-old definition of common carrier to try to exclude specifically CCS projects. And you'd have to sell something at the end. You can't just sequester it. So here you are saying, well, I don't like these big projects, but I want to do it just here in Iowa. And you're voting for a bill that would make it basically impossible to do what you just said you supported. This has been in 25 years of, I say this very sincerely, in 25 years of working on biofuels policy, This has been the most bizarre and frustrating issue I've ever dealt with because of the absolute disconnect from the facts and the absolute disconnect from what people say they want to do and bills they want to do. They hold up signs all the time saying no eminent domain for private companies. Did you know that not one bill was ever introduced in the last 3 years in Iowa that would eliminate eminent domain for private entities? Now they
Yeah,
introduced one that
I
would
believe that.
they would do one for CCS, but every oil pipeline in Iowa is privately owned. Every gas and diesel pipeline in Iowa is privately owned. Most of the propane and natural gas pipelines are privately owned. The electricity distribution system is mostly privately owned. And they all use eminent domain or have the power to. So you hold up these signs, you say you want to do this. And like I said, it really comes back to this isn't about principles and the lofty rhetoric that we've heard. It's really about preferences. You have a group of people on both extremes that say, I don't like this. Therefore, let's ban it. But I don't really have the votes or the nerve to put that in a bill. So let's come up with a convoluted bill that would make it really, basically impossible to do these projects. But oh, by the way, we wrote it so poorly, it will also shut down all energy projects in Iowa and make
Yeah.
economic development really hard. And oh, by the way, I said I cared about eminent domain and property rights, but we've got a project, they've spoken about this publicly, Southwest Iowa Renewable Energy. It's a less than 5-mile pipeline to get from them to the border with Nebraska. They have 100% voluntary easements, no eminent domain whatsoever. They're still limited to a 25-year permit and all these
Wow.
provisions, which means that project is now in jeopardy.
Now I want to just jump in off some of the stuff you just said, because you said that nothing in 25 years of policy that you've seen has been this frustrating. And I got to say, I've known you for 12 of those years. I've been interviewing for the last 12 years, and you've gotten pretty frustrated at a lot of things, and you can tell in your interviews when something's really, really bugging you. And so that's pretty incredible to me that this is kind of the pinnacle of all of that. And that includes things like the EPA just not doing any sort of E10 or any sort of RFS stuff for years, like delaying it year after year. And that includes that type of frustration.
What's frustrated here, so I think it's just, and yes, whenever you do policy work, prepare to be frustrated. Anyone who retires with any hair left on their head, I don't know how they do it. And I'm thinking of one individual in particular here who's retiring. But so part of it I understand, believe it or not, right? When you say the words eminent domain to me, the hair goes up on the back of my neck. Okay, nobody likes that, but there's a reason why the founding fathers put it in the Constitution. And there's a reason why we have laws around it and that guide its use, but that it guides its use. It doesn't pretend that it's unconstitutional, because it's not. And so the family farm I grew up on in Shenandoah, Iowa, has a petroleum pipeline going underneath it, and then the back corner of it is cut off. A little diagonal piece is cut off because of an airport expansion. So I don't think there are very many people in Iowa who know as much about eminent domain as my family does. Okay. And I have that same kind of visceral reaction to it. I don't like it. It's frustrating. There's uncertainty involved in all this stuff. So I get that. I'm sympathetic to that. But then you have to also use your brain. Well, what is the truth? What's happening? Is there, I can still farm my land? Are they giving me a fair deal? Are they going to protect me from my yield loss? Are they going to repair my tile lines? All this sort of stuff. And over 75% of the impacted landowners on the Summit project have said yes and signed a voluntary easement. Not one piece of land has been, made available for this project through eminent domain at this point. They're still out there negotiating. And like I said, there's other projects. The Sire project in Southwest Iowa, 100% voluntary easement. Very short line. But again, if that's what you're trying to protect, this bill would tell those landowners, no, you can't take Sire's money. You can't. We don't care that you want to give an easement on your land. We're telling you can't do it anyway. I mean, that's the opposite of protecting private property rights. So you've got that, and then you got these people holding up, these signs saying, No deadly pipelines. No one's ever been killed by a CO2 pipeline. CO2, we exhale CO2.
Right.
CO2 is neither flammable nor explosive.
And it's all outdoors, so if you are worried about CO2, you'd pretty much only be worried about it if you're like in an enclosed area like a garage.
Yeah, and look, if you know if you want to go do something stupid and dig down to the pipe and take an axe to it and chop it up, it's not going to end well for you. But short of that, it's about the most benign thing we put in a pipeline other than water.
Right.
How many think of how many Iowans pipe natural gas into their house? I am one. I enjoy natural gas. It's a cost-effective way to heat my house, and I really like to stay warm in January. Okay, especially as I've gotten older, you know. Um,
Yeah.
and yet, natural gas pipeline leaks blow houses up every year and kill families. Okay, and I don't say that lightly. It's happened in Iowa. It's horrific. It looks like a nuclear bomb went off when you see some of these things.
Yeah.
But we say, you know what, we like being warm. So that's a rational trade off, a risk versus reward that society has agreed to for decades and decades and decades. And now along comes something, but it's new, and so people have been scared. I've had little old ladies in red shirts come up to me and literally tell me that I'm going to burn in hell because I'm going to lead to the deaths of all these people. And they're just they believe it. That's the scary part. They
Yeah.
believe it.
They've accepted a level of fear mongering that has happened.
Yeah. So the NIMBYism in Iowa that we're starting to see on any of these projects is really kind of scary to me because we're not a big city. We don't have an ocean. We don't have a mountain. We need economic development if we're going to maintain and grow our population and our economy and our standard of living. And if all of a sudden we make it impossible to do business in Iowa and really unattractive, the rural parts of our state will hollow out really quickly. And I've seen it happen. I grew up during the 80s. I saw it when they threw out, in South Central Iowa. I'm lucky. I grew up where we have some pretty good farmland over in the very southwest. But you don't have to go east very far before the land's not real good. A lot of it's in set aside programs and different things. And there's just very few people there anymore. Very little economic development. And that's not what I want to see for the entire state of Iowa. So the lack of factual based, logic based discussion has been what's made this the most frustrating, because we can't even agree that 2 + 2 is 4.
Right.
Folks have made an emotional decision, and again, I stated I kind of understand where that emotion comes from.
Right.
So but then okay, let's take a deep breath and actually. But no, we're going to believe anything that some Sierra Club group, who's otherwise been trying to destroy your way of life for 30 years, all of a sudden we're going to believe what they say about safety or this or that or the other. And I think the last thing I just like to say is we have reached out in good faith for 3 years saying, listen, most of our ethanol plants are locally owned, and most of those local owners are farmers. They believe in property rights too, and we think Iowa's laws could be improved there. We could do some stuff to enhance the owner's rights to enforce the restoration process. We could do some things there to improve the tile replacement and concerns that people have, and the yield loss and different things like that. We could also do things to improve the process so it's less confrontational. Oh, gee, let's take some emotion out of this issue when we can. We could do some things to make it so that eminent domain would be a lot less likely by allowing some flexibility on the route once the initial route is rolled out, and you find out, farmers A, B, and C don't want this to go across their land, but farmer D does. We'll just zip down there. Well, if it's outside a very narrow corridor, Iowa law doesn't even allow that. It's just dumber than a box of rocks. So we said, hey, come join us, and we can actually have meaningful improvements to private property rights while also allowing a viable path forward. There'd be some more requirements on these pipelines, but there would still be a viable path forward for these projects that are so important to Iowa's ag future, because they're really the only way to grow. There's There's E15, which we're pushing hard for. You mentioned that earlier. That's kind of hopefully is a near-term boom for us. But long-term, all the other growth markets for corn and for ethanol are tied to producing ultra-low carbon ethanol. And so this is hugely important to the future of Iowa's economy. And so, we've been reaching out for 3 years saying, let's find that middle ground. And the other side has simply said, if it doesn't kill the project, I don't want it.
You were
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the US. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
listening to Farm Here Daily. We'll have more on HF 639 in a moment, but first let's take a look at the post-holiday Tuesday market close. And it was a bit of a mixed session here on grain for that Tuesday close. July corn was unchanged at $4.59.5. September fell 4 cents, $4.33 3/4. Soybeans in July 2 1/4 cents higher at $10.62.5, with August up 2 cents at $10.58. Soybean meal in July, 10 cents a hundredweight higher at $296.30. July wheat down 14 cents at $5.28.5, with September falling 13 3/4, $5.44 1/4. In livestock market close for Tuesday, June, live cattle down 67 cents a hundredweight, $215.12, with August $1.15 lower at $209.30. Feeder cattle in August, $2.22 a hundredweight in the red at $298.15, with September down $2.10 at $297.25. Lean hogs in June, 80 cents a hundredweight more at $99.10, with July rising 60 cents at $102.15 a hundredweight. That is the Tuesday post-holiday market close. You are listening to Farm Here Daily. We are going to return to our conversation with Monte Shaw, Executive Director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. And before I let you go, Monte, I want to wrap this back around and go back to this particular bill, which obviously we've been talking about it this entire time, but HF 639, and just ask, what is there to do about it right now? It was passed by the House, HF 639, and the request is to veto, have Governor Reynolds veto it. Is that all there is to do?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it because this bill's had more twists and turns than a pretzel. But at the end of the day, through weird coalitions, it was leveraged onto the floor of the Senate, and it passed with more minority votes than majority votes. I honestly don't know the last time a bill has passed like that. There has to have been one sometime, but it's been a long time. So it is sitting on the governor's desk, and the governor has two options. She can veto the bill, or she can sign the bill into law. We think, again, even if you don't like CCS projects, even if you don't like eminent domain, there's these other insurance provisions and lawsuit provisions in the bill that apply to all the energy projects in front of the Iowa Utilities Commission. Should scare the crap out of you, and you should be picking up the phone or dropping an email to the governor's office saying, please veto House File 639. Obviously, if you care about the future of corn demand and the future of ethanol and the future of the rural economy, we also think there's even more reasons to ask for that veto, because in addition to the broad provisions, there are two in how they define a common carrier, and in this 25-year limit to a non-renewable permit that are specifically rifle shots to these CCS projects. So, I know there were a lot of victory lap speeches when this passed, talking about the Constitution and property rights, but I just don't see that in the bill. And I don't see, and like I said, in the last 3 years, not one person has introduced a bill that I'm aware of that would eliminate the use of eminent domain for private companies. That's pretty straightforward. I could write that bill in about 2 sentences, but they haven't, because this is not about principles. This is about preferences. They don't like CCS. There's, like I said, kind of a fringe group on either side that don't like it for different reasons, but they don't like it, and so they're trying to outlaw it. We hope that the governor would veto it, both because it takes away the opportunity for massive new markets for farmers and because of these broader unintended consequences. The last thing I might mention real quick is this is happening. Okay, CCS
Yes.
is going forward in Nebraska. The Tallgrass CCS pipeline will be up and running in the fourth quarter. It's going forward in Indiana, in Illinois, in North Dakota. It's going forward in Brazil. And so I'll just end with this message that I hope is sobering to people, because sometimes I think we get all caught up in these emotions and we don't, look at the forest for the trees. And that is, for the last 25 years, Iowa has been the most profitable place to turn corn into ethanol. And we have benefited greatly from that stature. And it's not because we were the number one corn state. That's part of it, but we were also a state where you could build an ethanol plant. The number two corn state made it hard to build an ethanol plant. They're not the number two ethanol producer. Okay. So 25 years, most profitable place to produce ethanol was here in Iowa. In the fourth quarter of this year, that will stop. The most profitable place to produce ethanol will become the plants in Nebraska hooked up to the Tallgrass pipeline.
Wow.
We'll get a 30 to 50 to maybe even 60-cent premium in the marketplace for their ultra low carbon ethanol, and they will be kicking our butt. The question is that a temporary dislodgement or is it permanent? Because if the governor signs this bill and it's permanent, then the economic consequences will be just as profound, but in reverse, as we've benefited from the last 25 years. And that's not just me blowing smoke. That's just economic 101. The plants in Nebraska will double and triple in size, and the plants in Iowa will not expand. And quite frankly, some of them will probably go away. And I don't want that. I've been working, like I said, for 25 years on this, 20 of it for Iowa producers specifically. And I want to see markets grow for everybody. And that's what CCS opens up. By producing ultra low carbon ethanol, we can get ethanol into sustainable aviation fuel. We can get it into marine ocean going vessels. We could probably get it into railroads. I just was reading a story out of Brazil that John Deere is rolling out ethanol engines down there, heavy duty engines. So who knows? But if you're concerned about the drop in the corn prices over the last couple of years, there's a connection. We have more corn produced than we have demand right now. And the trends are for that to continue unless we can create new markets. And that's what CCS does for us.
Monte Shaw, the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association Executive Director, talking today. Thank you so much for your time for joining us on Farm Here Daily.
Anytime. Thank you for the opportunity.
This is Farm Here Daily, a field forward podcast. Thank you for listening. Again, in order to keep producing this type of local Iowa content, we would love to have you join our community. Please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. Additionally, you can find me on social media at Geiger Reports, as well as WHO TV Channel 13 every weekday in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and we'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.